It is spring 1916. The flowers are blooming, the bees are humming. A battle is brewing on the horizon. Not just any battle, in fact. The Battle of Jutland, World War I's largest naval battle. A full-scale clash of steel battleships and burning hatred. It was the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet set against the Imperial Navy's High Seas Fleet. The German fleet was commanded by Vice Admiral Reinhard Scheer and the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet by Admiral Sir John Jellicoe. Both were powerful opponents. Both planned to outrun the competition. The air was tense. But to understand the Battle of Jutland, we need to travel back in time. Germany was armed with 16 Dreadnought-class battleships and had little chance of winning a head-to-head clash with the Royal Navy's 28. The Germans therefore decided on a divide-and-conquer strategy, sailing into the North Sea and attacking the English coast. In the month of January 1916, current commander of the German fleet, Admiral von Paul, fell ill and was replaced with Scheer, who thought that the fleet had been used too defensively. Insisting that the German fleet had better ships and men than the British, he believed that they ought to take the war to them. He planned to seek battle under conditions unfavorable to the enemy. On April 25th, a decision was made to halt indiscriminate attacks by submarine on merchant shipping. This was shortly after protests by neutral colonies, notably the U.S., that their nationals had been the victims of attacks. Germany agreed that future attacks would only take place according to internationally agreed prize rules, which required an attacker to offer a warning and allow the crew of the vessel time to flee, and not to attack all neutral vessels. Scheer disagreed with these terms and believed that they took away the advantage of secret approach by submarines, leaving them vulnerable to target ships. Indeed, he set about deploying the submarine fleet against military vessels. Scheer hoped that following a successful submarine attack, fast British escorts such as destroyers would be tied down by anti-submarine operations. Scheer planned to catch the British in expected locations where he would attack and hopefully even out the forces between the two. The Royal Navy would take aggressive action, dragging its weakened force toward Scheer, where he would proceed to lead them into an ambush where he hoped to destroy a section of the British fleet. A plan was devised to station submarines offshore from British naval bases, and then stage some action that would draw out the British ships to the waiting submarines. The operation was scheduled for the 17th of May, but due to many problems, was executed on the 22nd. It wasn't a success. The ambushed submarines were now on station experiencing difficulties of their own. Visibility near the coast was frequently poor due to fog, and the sea conditions were either so calm the slightest ripple as from the periscope could give away their position, or so rough as to make it very hard to keep the vessel at a steady depth. The British had become aware of unusual submarine activity and had begun counter-patrols that forced the submarines out of position. The plan was abandoned. After another failed attack, it was decided to use the alternative plan, sending a patrol of battlecruisers to the Skagerrak, a sea which lay between Norway and Denmark, where it was likely they would encounter British ships, both merchant and military. On the 30th of May, the coded signal 31 May GG 2490 was transmitted to the fleet to inform them the Skagerrak attack would start on the 31st of May. Unfortunately for Germany, the British had obtained a copy of the main German codebook from the light cruiser SMS Magdeburg, which had been boarded by the Russian Navy after the ship ran aground in Russian territorial waters in 1914. German naval radio communications could therefore usually be quickly deciphered, and the British Admiralty usually knew about German activities. They were able to intercept the signal from Scheer, making it clear something significant was imminent. Unknowing of the Germans' objectives, Jellicoe decided to position his fleet to block any attempt by the Germans to enter the North Atlantic or the Baltic through the Skagerrak by taking a position off Norway. Jellicoe led the 16 dreadnought battleships and 3 battlecruisers out of Scapa Flow at 10:30 p.m. on the 30th of May. He was to meet 8 more dreadnought battleships commanded by Vice Admiral Martin Durand coming from Cromarty. The main German fleet of 16 dreadnought battleships left the Jade at 2:30 a.m., being joined off Heligoland at 4 a.m. by the 6 pre-dreadnoughts from the Elbe River. Both the German and the British fleets sailed in a similar formation, with a scouting squadron of battlecruisers sailing ahead of the main battle. Admiral Beatty's faster force of 6 ships of the 1st and 4th battlecruiser squadrons, plus 4 fast battleships, left the Firth of Forth on the next day, and Jellicoe's intention was to rendezvous with him 90 miles west of the mouth of the Skagerrak, off the coast of Jutland, and wait for the Germans or for their intentions to become clear. Jellicoe's ships proceeded to their rendezvous undamaged and undiscovered. By around 2 p.m., Beatty's ships were proceeding eastward at roughly the same latitude as Admiral Franz Hipper's squadrons, which was heading north. The Battle of Jutland had begun. At 2:36 p.m., the Germans scored the first hit of the battle when SMS Elbing of Rear Admiral Friedrich Bodeker's Scouting Group 2 hit her British counterpart, Galatea, at extreme range. Meanwhile, Beatty began to move his battlecruisers and supporting forces southeastwards, then east to cut the German ships off from their base. Unfortunately for Beatty, his initial course changes at 2:32 p.m. were not received by Sir Hugh Evan Thomas, his 5th Battle Squadron. As a result, the 4 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships, which were the fastest and most heavily armed in the world at that time, remained on the previous course for several minutes, ending up 10 miles behind. Dividing the force had serious consequences for the British, costing them what would have been an overwhelming advantage in ships and firepower during the first half of the coming battle. At 3:45 p.m., Hipper turned southeast to lead Beatty towards Scheer, who was 46 miles southeast with the main force of the High Seas Fleet. At 3:48 p.m., with the opposing forces roughly parallel at 15,000 yards, with the British to the southwest of the Germans, Hipper opened fire, followed by the British ships as their guns came to bear upon targets. Thus began the opening phase of the battlecruiser action known as the Run to the South, in which the British chased the Germans and Hipper intentionally led Beatty towards Scheer. During the first minutes of the ensuing battle, all the British ships except Princess Royal fired far over their German opponents due to adverse visibility conditions before finally getting into range. The Germans drew first blood. Aided by superior visibility, Hipper's 5 battlecruisers quickly registered hits on 3 of the 6 British battlecruisers. 7 minutes passed before the British managed to score their first hit. During the run to the south from 3:48 p.m. to 4:54 p.m., both HMS Indefatigable and HMS Queen Mary sunk. The two totaled a crew of 2,294 men. Only 11 survived. Shortly after, a salvo struck on or around HMS Princess Royal, which was obscured by spray and smoke from shell bursts. A signalman promptly leapt onto the bridge of line and announced, "Princess Royal is blown up, sir." Beatty famously turned to his flag captain, saying, "Chatfield, there seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." At 4:30 p.m., Scheer's leading battleship sighted the distant battlecruiser action. Soon after, HMS Southampton of Beatty's 2nd Light Cruiser Squadron, led by Commodore William Goodenough, sighted the main body of Scheer's High Seas Fleet, dodging numerous heavy-caliber salvos to report in detail the German strength. 16 dreadnoughts with 6 older battleships. This was the first news that Beatty and Jellicoe had that Scheer and his battle fleet were even at sea. A battle quickly ensued, and each destroyer desperately fought to torpedo the larger enemy ships. Shortly after the conflict began, retreat was evident, and each force turned away. Miraculously, all ships remained unharmed, with the exception of Seydlitz. As soon as Beatty sighted Scheer's distant battleship line, he proceeded to turn his battlecruiser force 180 degrees, heading north to lure the Germans toward Jellicoe. Meanwhile, at 4:47, having received Goodenough's signal and knowing that Beatty was now leading the German battle fleet north to him, Jellicoe signaled to his own forces that the fleet action they had waited so long for was finally imminent. With Scheer's forces in range, Jellicoe ordered deployment to the east at 6:15 p.m. Meanwhile, Hipper had rejoined Scheer, and the combined high seas fleet was heading north, directly toward Jellicoe. Scheer had no indication that Jellicoe was at sea, let alone that he was bearing down the northwest. Beatty's 4 surviving battlecruisers were now crossing the van of the British dreadnoughts to join Hood's 3 battlecruisers. In the process, numerous ships were crossing to reach their proper stations, often barely escaping collisions and under fire from some of the approaching German ships. This period of traffic was known as the Windy Corner. Both British ships, Defense and Invincible, under extreme gunfire, exploded, leaving a surviving total of 6 crew members. Lutzow, partially flooded and unable to communicate by radio, retreated. At 6:30 p.m., Jellicoe officially crossed Scheer's T and joined the main battle fleet action for the first time. The officers in the lead German battleships and Scheer himself were taken completely by surprise when they emerged from drifting clouds of smoky mist to suddenly find themselves facing the massed power of the entire Grand Fleet main battle line, which they did not even know was at sea. Realizing he was heading into a death trap, Scheer ordered his fleet to turn and flee at 6:33 p.m. Under a pall of smoke and mist, Scheer's forces succeeded in disengaging by an expertly executed 180-degree turn maneuver of the high seas fleet. Jellicoe did not chase directly, but headed south, determined to keep the high seas fleet west of him. British destroyer Shark sunk under fire. Commodore Goodenough's 2nd Light Cruiser Squadron dodged the fire of German battleships for a second time to re-establish contact with the high seas fleet shortly after 7 o'clock p.m. Jellicoe had crossed Scheer's T again, causing severe damage to the German battleships. At 7:17, Scheer turned his outnumbered and outgunned fleet to the west, using the battle about turn. From about 7:05 p.m. to about 7:30 p.m., the Germans sustained a total of 37 heavy hits while inflicting only 2. Derfflinger alone received 14. While his battlecruisers drew the fire of the British fleet, Scheer slipped away, laying smoke screens. The Battle of Jutland was over, and was a contributing factor to the U.S. entry into the war, as it led to the decision of the Germans to engage in unrestricted submarine warfare, while increasing tensions between Britain and Germany.